Hello there, it's good to be back for this fourth episode in a series on preparing and painting a large metal model. Today I'm thrilled to show you the simple technique I use to paint this dragon and its display base. All that without even having to hold them in my hand. The model I'll be working on is the stunning Rampaging Red Dragon sculpted by Tom Meier. This model is now sold by Ral Partha under the name Greater Red Dragon. I'll leave a link to their online store in the description below so you can check it out. If it's the first video of the series you're watching, in the previous episode I covered how to securely attach the model parts together, preparing the display base, filling gaps with green stuff, and completing the base with milliput epoxy putty and other elements. You can find all these videos in my Rampaging Red Dragon playlist. Okay, before starting to paint the dragon, I wash it with soft soap and a toothbrush. After handling it during the previous steps, it's definitely covered with sweat from my fingers and dust from the tools I've used. Cleaning the surface will help the primer adhere better. I primed the model and its base off camera. I used a light gray Vallejo primer to cover the whole dragon. I hang it up by the tail and will prime the part of the tail that hasn't been primed when it's dry. For the base, I start with a black primer. I then apply a dark gray primer to the crumbling stone wall, and finally a pale gray zenithal on the stones. It's amazing just how a few layers of primer can bring out the details in a model. Alright, it's time to start painting. I'm gonna begin by painting the entire dragon in a dark red color using Ripper MSP Crimson Red. This color is very similar to Vallejo 70926 Red. It's important to take my time and apply thin layers to get a nice even coat. And don't worry if you don't have an airbrush. You can achieve the same result with a paintbrush, which is what I'm gonna use to finish up the base coat later on. Before I move on to the base, I make sure to clean my airbrush thoroughly with water. For the base, I'm only gonna paint the outline with matte black, because the primer was a little bit too shiny to my taste. I'm gonna leave the stone like this for now. Here's how the model looks like once I've applied the base coat. You can see that I still need to go back and fill the areas between the scales. It's a bit of a tedious process, but it's worth it for the end result. And here's the base ready to be painted. I'm excited to see how it's gonna turn out. Let's start by painting the base. We'll come back to the dragon later. I'm gonna use the same technique that I used to paint the stone walls of my tabletop buildings in my previous videos. I begin by staining the surface with paint diluted with water. Here I'm using Vallejo Flat Brown. It's a great color that's similar to Ripper MSP Muddy Brown. I'm also gonna cover part of the ground with the same color, being careful to leave some of the gray stone showing through. It's all about creating a natural mineral look. Next, I'm gonna repeat the same process with English Uniform from Vallejo, which is similar to Ripper MSP Lone Star Leather or Rich Leather. Here you could also use Leather Brown if you prefer. Again, I'm being careful to apply the paint randomly to avoid creating patterns. And here's what the base looks like once the paint is dry. It's already starting to look really nice. Now I'm gonna add some depth to the base by using Citadel Agrax Earthshade, which I'll dilute with water. Once I really applied it everywhere, the shade darkens all the base elements. It also creates a plastic-like appearance. It's all part of the process. Don't worry, this glossy reflection will mostly disappear during the following steps. I will now intensify the mineral appearance of the stone by adding flecks of pale gray, beige and yellowish brown khaki green. To make things easier, since I don't want to hold the base in my hand all the time, I'm gonna place it on my desk so that it's stable and at the right angle to paint comfortably. For a natural look, I want to do a glaze that stains the stone without completely covering it. However, on my first try I used too much pigment on my brush, and the gray covered the stone opaquely. I'll need to make some adjustments to avoid this. So I add water to the paint and now it becomes too fluid and there's a risk that it will run between the stone. Before continuing, I dry my brush and absorb the paint. After some trial and error, I adjust the consistency of the paint until it's milky and I continue to glaze some stone. Next, I do the same with the beige color. By glazing the stone randomly without reproducing a pattern, I can create a more natural look. Same with the khaki green, but this time I'm focusing on the stones at the bottom of the wall. These stones are less exposed to the sun and more humid, making them the perfect spot for moss to grow. After the glazes are dry, it's time to move on to dry brushing. I'm using an old paintbrush and start by dry brushing the sand with a light brown. Moving on to the wall, I'll be using Ripper MSP tan leather. I'm brushing from top to bottom and only touching the edge of the stones when the brush goes down. To get a smooth finish, I'm gonna work gradually and apply only a little paint at a time on the surface. Multiple passes are necessary. This step is where the magic happens. All the different colors blend together to create a stunning effect. Here's the result after the first dry brushing. I can't wait to see how it turns out when it's finished. Now it's time to paint the wood. I'm starting with a leather brown dry brushing. And of course, I can't forget about the sand. I'll be using the same technique and color as for the wood. Then I use tan leather to bring out the texture even more. But before I push the highlight any further, I want to add some more shadows in certain areas. To build up the highlights, I'm gonna use a light gray. I'm using a brush with softer bristles and start by applying very little pressure. With this color, I will mainly highlight the ground and the base of the wall. After, I delicately do a light dry brushing with an even paler gray, creating subtle highlights. I aim precisely for the upper edge of the stones, applying the paint only when the brush makes a downward movement. I'd like to read your opinion. Let me know what you think of this technique in the comment section. Now I'm carefully avoiding touching the sand, as I want to give it a special touch with another color. I'll gently use beige to highlight the sand, without touching the stone, creating a warm atmosphere. I'll also add warmth and character by highlighting the pieces of wood, especially on the edges. And for the final highlighting, I use ivory. I apply this final highlight on top of the stones and lightly on the very edges of the stones. Each small step of this process has a minimal impact, but slowly the colors come together and the intricate details of the model reveal themselves. I also apply a little ivory color on the wood, stone and sand on the ground to make them stand out. I'm not done yet. I'll paint some moss on the stones, mainly at the bottom of the wall. I start by staining the stones with khaki green. Then, to add some texture, I'm dabbing the surface with Ripper MSP Pale Lichen color. For an optimal and consistent result, I'm repeating the same process on the other side of the wall. In the next step, I'm sweeping away the dust caused by dry brushing with a clean, dry paintbrush, and then repaint the wooden plank with matte black. There never seems to be an end to painting, so I'm adding some khaki green to taint the ground. Then I'm adding a bit of worn olive, but not too much. It's supposed to be a stain, not a graffiti. This brighter color will add a lot of character to the scene. I'm adding even more shading in a few places, bringing out the best of the model. And finally, here's the result once the paint has dried. Now, let's get back to the dragon. As I mentioned before, the red paint didn't reach the bottom surfaces between the scales, so I'm gonna fill in those areas to create a solid base coat. To do this, I'll be using the same red color I applied with the airbrush, but thinned down with water so that it can easily reach the areas between the scales. This ensures that every part of the model is covered with paint. And there we have it, a nice solid base color. In total, I applied 3 thin coats of paint and the details are all still visible. Now I'm gonna try something I've never done before. I'm gonna experiment applying a beige zenithal and then covering it with a lighter shade of red to see if I'll be able to highlight the model faster. First, I apply the beige only to the top surfaces. Once the beige is dry, I cover it with a transparent red from Vallejo, making sure to cover all the surfaces previously painted with beige. Although the two reds are very similar, I can see a slight difference. Overall, I'd say that the test was successful and promising for future projects. Next on the agenda is painting the belly scales. For this, I'm using Vallejo Flat Brown as a base coat. To keep my arm from getting tired or shaky while painting, I leave the dragon on my desk. I use a foam that I saved from a boxed set of miniatures to keep the dragon in place while painting. These foams can also come in handy for packing miniatures. By the way, packaging miniature will be the subject of one of my future videos. Besides, placing the model flat on the desk also makes it more stable when painting. When I need to paint at a different angle, I use another foam that I can fold to adjust the height. This way I can be more comfortable while painting. I'm gonna paint the underside of the feet a slightly different color from the scale, so I apply a brown base coat to them. Here's what the dragon looks like, with the brown base coat applied to the belly scale and the feet. Next, I'm gonna apply Citadel Agrax Earth Shade to the scales. This shade will help enhance all the sculpted details and give the model a more three-dimensional appearance. I take great care to make sure every scale has the perfect amount of shade, and then patiently wait for everything to dry. Here's the result once the shade has dry. Now I'll focus on shading those areas that were previously out of sight. And of course, I won't forget to pay attention to the wings phalanges. I patiently wait for the shading to dry before moving on to the next wing. Patience is required as the shade takes a while to dry, but the end result is always worth the wait. While I wait for the shade to dry, I take a moment to scan the Draconomicon for some inspiration. I like the stripe pattern on the scale of this red dragon. However, I'm not sure I'm gonna do that on my dragon. I also like the grayish color of the membrane. The tail is different. horns are very similar though. Now it's time to build up the red color by dry brushing a first layer of the same color used for the base coat. To make those lighter red areas really pop, I carefully dry brush the upper parts of the dragon's limb with an ivory color. Using Ripper MSP Fresh Blood, I then glaze the scales that were previously covered with the ivory color. The tail proves to be a bit more challenging, but I take my time and dry brush Ripper MSP Candlelight Yellow before adding Fresh Blood again. As you can see, working with red is no easy feat. However, I'm determined to find the perfect approach, and so I continue to experiment. This time I dry brush the entire tail with Ripper MSP Candlelight Yellow. Next, I carefully glaze the scales with red, making sure not to cover the yellow color entirely. The end result is a beautiful, subtle difference between the tones of red. Here's the result. There's only a slight difference between the tones of red, but it makes all the difference. Moving on to the head of the dragon, I use the same dry brush technique to apply yellow. Then I apply a thin coat of red. Although I'm not entirely convinced of this approach, I have to persevere. I continue to experiment all over the top of the dragon's body. After all, experimentation is the best way to discover what works best. Now it's time to apply Ripper MSP Brilliant Red to the model. This color is very bright and should help build a highlight, giving the dragon an even more striking appearance. With a careful hand, I apply this bright hue to the scales where the ambient light is most likely to hit. I also apply it to the phalanges in a downward movement. And on the scales under the feet. I will now mix some Fireball Orange with the Brilliant Red to create a lighter tone. I'll start slowly and adjust the mix as needed. Again, I apply the paint from top to bottom as much as possible. I apply this mix on top of the head. On the jaw. And on the neck as well. The phalanges of the wing also benefit from this beautiful orange highlight. Essentially, my aim is to ensure that every upper part of the model is highlighted with this orangey tone, bringing out the dragon's best features. Moving on to the tail. Neck and head. Wing phalanges. I take great care to highlight each part of the dragon. Afterward, I repeat the same process with pure fireball orange, adding a thin layer to every part of the dragon that has already been highlighted. Next, I turn my attention to the belly scales. I use Ripper MSP Suntan Flesh to highlight the edge of the scales. One by one, I highlight each scale. I take my time to avoid touching the scales already painted in red. Next, I carefully dry brush the scales with the same color to ensure a smooth transition between colors. I apply the same technique to the scale under the feet, gently dry brushing them with the suntan flesh color. Now it's time to add fire to the mix. I begin to brush all the belly scales with the vibrant fireball orange. The smooth transition between the colors is a positive sign, and I feel encouraged to continue the process. I take my time to apply gentle pressure, ensuring a smooth transition of colors as I brush the belly scales. And then move on to the scales under the feet. I continue to apply light pressure, aiming for a subtle yet effective highlight. To further enhance the highlight, I add a touch of sun yellow to the fireball orange. Starting slowly, I focus on the edges of the scales, gradually building up the highlight. Although it takes time, working slowly and precisely is the best way to get a good result. I pay extra attention to the areas that will be most visible when the dragon is displayed on its base. For the scales most exposed to the ambient light, I apply a vibrant coat of pure sun yellow, which dramatically increases the highlight. To blend the colors seamlessly before the paint is completely dry, I use a damp paintbrush to gently brush the colors together without even adding more paint. To add depth and dimension, I carefully apply a small amount of Seraphine Sepia shade between each scale. The shade helps blend the colors together. Before moving forward, I take time to do some touch-up to ensure that the scales are crisp and well defined. Here's how it looks so far. I can't wait to see the final result. The scales are looking great already, but I want to add more realism by adding a subtle reflection on the edges of the scale most exposed to the light. For this, I'll use an ivory color. Moving on to the next scales, I highlight them one by one with care and precision. I then move on to the scale on the stomach, making sure to create a subtle difference in color that adds depth and realism. Keeping in mind the direction of the fictional light source, I highlight only the side of the scale that would naturally catch the most light. Slowly but surely, I build up the intensity of the highlights to achieve the desired effect. And with that, I'm pleased with the results so far, and I'm ready to move on to the next step. I leave the scales as they are and proceed with the next phase of the project. Before moving on, I take a moment to do a few touch-ups to ensure that there is no yellow spot on the red scales. I'll now focus on the claw and ergo, starting with a base coat of flat brown, before moving on to highlight them with suntan flesh. There were only a few places on the claw that needed a touch of flat brown, but with that complete, I can now begin highlighting with suntan flesh. A simple stroke of brush creates a subtle, yet noticeable reflection. Moving on to tan leather, I carefully add a narrow line on each claw that I previously painted with suntan flesh. With a steady hand, I repeat the process on each claw, starting at the top and ending in a point as I lift the brush from the surface. Slowly but surely, the claws take shape as I add each reflection. I continue the same approach on the wing claws. The spikes on the back, and the horns. I first apply a flat brown base coat. With a careful placement of suntan flesh, I build upon the previous color to create a reflection. Finally, an ivory highlight adds the finishing touch, bringing the claws and horns to life and completing this phase of the project. Now it's time to glaze the wings with Fireball Orange. To create a beautiful transparency effect, I make sure to add enough water to the paint mixture. In retrospect, I realized that I could have repainted the shaded areas to easily obtain a uniform colored surface. Take a look at the wing once the first glazing dries. It's coming along nicely. With 3 glazings on the wing, I move on to painting the veins that extend over the membranes from the edge of the hand. This step requires a lot of precision, as the paint must be diluted with water to avoid leaving any unwanted opaque marks. To make the back of the wings stand out from the dragon's red body, I mix red and gray for a unique tone. After finding the perfect shade, I apply the paint following the direction of the membranes from front to back. As the top of the wing dries, I apply yellow glazing on the wing where I painted the veins. This will enhance the transparency effect and give the illusion the veins are under the skin. To perfectly mix the yellow with the existing color on the wing, I add water to the glazed area's edge. Check out the final result from various angles once the paint dries. I repeat the same process on the other wing with the same care and attention to detail. Once again, I make sure to cover the darker areas as much as possible to achieve a consistent finish. After applying several glazes, I realize it would be better if I cover the dark marks on the wing without diluting the paint. While the wing dries, I begin working on the other wing's backside. I start with the darker areas, using the same red as the base coat to create a uniform look. Next, I mix gray and red and try my best to match the tone I've applied on the other wing. With each layer of color, I slowly build up the membrane's shape using the layering technique. This process may take some time, but I find that applying different shades of gray mixed with red is worth the effort, as each layer merges smoothly and accentuates the shape of the membrane. To create a fibrous texture, I carefully draw lines. Back and forth following the shape of the wing. Gradually increasing the intensity of the gray color. As I wait for the paint to dry, I take the opportunity to apply another glaze on the other wing. I'm pleased with how the dorsal side of the wing looks, once the paint has dried. While painting the horns and claws, I also painted some scales on the dragon's head. I'm now applying a glaze to these scales to blend them in with the other scales and tone down their contrast. Moving back to the wings, I start painting some veins. I make sure to dilute the red paint with water to achieve the perfect consistency. I find that working on several parts of the model at the same time speeds up the painting process. So I trace the blood vessels in zigzag pattern while the other areas dry. By avoiding straight lines, I'm able to create a more organic look. Once the veins are dry, I apply another glaze over the membranes. I'm pleased with how it brings everything together. I'm very happy with the final result once everything has dried. The last glaze has created a beautiful and subtle effect that slightly attenuates the contrast between the veins and the membranes. I now use Ripper MSP Twilight Purple and Gem Purple to paint the inside of the dragon's maw. Diluting the Twilight Purple with water, I carefully apply a thin, translucent coat to taint the surface, creating depth without covering it opaquely. I then dry brush with Gem Purple to bring out the gums. Continuing with the same technique, I emphasize each fold of the palette. Next, I paint the tongue with a red base coat before adding a lighter shade to create a realistic and organic look that complements the rest of the dragon. To create the illusion of a wet surface, I add an ivory glaze to the edge of the tongue, simulating the reflection of the light. I then reach for suntan flesh to begin painting the base coat on each tooth. Taking my time to ensure an even coverage. Although some areas may be challenging to access, I'm determined to paint every tooth perfectly, so they look beautiful no matter from what angle we look at them. While waiting for the teeth to dry, I take this time to add a mix of suntan flesh and red to the spikes above the eye and in the ears, enhancing their appearance. I then switch to tan leather for the next step, painting the teeth with precision and ensuring the base color remained visible at the gum line. And finally, ivory. I apply a lustrous glaze on the teeth, bringing them to life with a radiant shine. Although the image may be a bit blurry, the result is truly rewarding. The eyes are the windows to the soul, and I'm excited to bring this dragon to life by first painting the pupils and edges black. Tom Meier has done an exceptional job in sculpting the pupils, making this step super easy. After, I apply a beige color to the eye, creating a bright base to help bring out the color of the eye later on. For a stunning contrast against the red scales, I've chosen Ripper MSP Spruce Green, a beautiful blue-green color. With great care, I apply the spruce green, avoiding the pupil and eyelids. In this part of the video, you can catch a better glimpse of the teeth and tongue. With a steady hand, I highlight the edge of the pupil with a mix of yellow and spruce green, adding depth and dimension to the eye. And to truly bring out the life in the eye, I add an ivory dot to represent the reflection of the light, creating a stunning effect. As we near the end of the process, I take care to highlight the scale by adding a touch of yellow where the light hits them from above. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you found it helpful and inspiring, a like would be greatly appreciated. The final step before sealing the dragon is to highlight the spikes and claws with ivory, increasing the contrast and creating a menacing appearance. In the next video, I'll demonstrate how to firmly fix the dragon on its base with anchor pins and add grass and bushes to create a stunning display. Your support means a lot to me. If you'd like to see more tutorial videos like this, make sure to subscribe to my channel. Don't hesitate to share any question or comment in the section below. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep on painting and take care.